after military service. Many minority veterans have skills necessary to be successful in these types of careers, but don't know how to get their feet in the door. So many skills learned during the veterans' time in the military are easily transferable into the technology space, but minority vets often struggle to explain their service in a way that is understood by hiring managers. Tonight, we're going to be talking to 3 guests, and the conversation will include a discussion about expectation versus reality when applying and interviewing for these types of jobs, challenges and systemic barrier minority veterans face when applying for these jobs, and insights into pathways forward in these particular careers. I'd like to welcome our guests and ask them to turn on their cameras. My name is Justine Evirs, and I am your host this evening, and I'm really excited to be here with you tonight. To get us started, we have Katherine Pratt, Program Manager at Microsoft and also the co-founder of Minority Veterans of America. We also have Vivian Richards, Senior Solutions Operations at Splunk, and Tamia Russell, Cybersecurity Policy Analyst, Office of Management and Budget. And I'm really excited to get to know you ladies. To kick us off, I'd love for you to introduce yourself. Please let us know your pronouns and a quick recap of who you are and what you do. And I'm just going to go in the order of the screen. So hopefully you're feeling ready, because the first person on my screen is Tamia. And I'd like to get us started with you, and then we're going to get into the discussion and just hop right into it tonight. So thanks for being here.
Thanks for inviting me. Hello, everyone. My name is Tamia Russell. I started my career in the Army as a 25 Bravo, which is an information technology specialist. I did my time, almost 8 years, did the reserves as well. And I took on my first federal civilian job overseas in Germany as a system administrator. And then, I've just been building on my career since then. I started out as a GS7. For those who know, the federal government, I started as a GS7. And I've moved myself up, going to different geolocations to try to get myself up the promotion. It's been a good journey. And now I'm a cybersecurity policy analyst here in DC for the Office of Management and Budget.
Awesome. I'm in the DC area as well. So we're neighbors right now, calling in. Thanks for including where you're from, where you're at right now. It's always nice to hear. Katherine, I'd love to hear from you as well. Welcome.
Hi, thanks everyone. I'm Katherine. My pronouns are she, her. I'm calling in from Seattle, Washington. I was in the Air Force. I did Air Force ROTC through undergrad and went into pilot training because I was going to be a pilot. Turns out I suck at flying planes, and so did not make it through pilot training. And then based on my undergraduate degree of aerospace engineering, ended up working on the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter, which is also a fun time. Ended up leaving the military, worked for a little bit in a lab at the University of Washington, got my PhD almost 2 years ago now, over 2 years ago now, because that anniversary just passed. And I now am a program manager at Microsoft. And so that's super exciting. And I just want to say real quickly that while I am a Microsoft employee, I am here on my own time. So there you go. Was that everything? Did I cover all the things?
You covered all the things. Thank you so much.
Perfect.
Awesome. And then next we have Vivian.
Hi, everybody. I'm Vivian Richards. My pronouns are she, her, hers. Similar to Katherine, although I do work for Splunk, I'm here on my own time. So I retired after over 20 years in the military in October of 2020, right as, COVID had locked everything down. I started Splunk November of 2020 while I was on terminal leave. I worked in the program executive office for tactical radios with a defense contractor. My time in the military was in the military intelligence field, particularly signals intelligence analyst. So I did a lot of really in-depth tech work. And then because I was on the enlisted side and moved up, I retired at the rank of E9. I also had a lot of different management experience to go along with it. So when I got the step into tech, I got in at a kind of senior level position. So super happy to be here and share all of the lessons learned.
Awesome. And just to make it fair, I'll tell you guys a little bit about myself because I always think it's weird for everybody to introduce themselves and then like no one knows who the moderator is and I'm just asking all these random questions. So Katherine, I think our paths have crossed a few times in SVA and a few other conferences, but my name obviously is Justine Evirs. I'm a Navy veteran. I'm also a Navy military spouse. I've been married to the Navy longer than I was ever in the Navy at this point. I spent a little over a decade in the higher education space working in student veteran services and then moved into the nonprofit space. I moved to Silicon Valley, so I've hosted events at Splunk. I've actually interviewed at Splunk. I've hosted events at Facebook, Google, Box, Dropbox, Slack, all of the things while working for an organization called Bunker Labs. And then I started my own company, which was called The Paradigm Switch, which was rooted in tech, building a digital global community only in technology. Like we didn't meet face to face. We did everything digital pre-COVID. This is back in 2017. So we were teaching military spouses how to work anywhere in the world. Started out serving veterans, found the need for the spouse community. So we kind of pivoted and did that thing. Now I'm doing my own thing in a second company. So a lot of experience in tech, and I'm really honored to be here to host this conversation. But I'm really excited to get to know you guys. So enough about me. And I'd love to kick off with Vivian and ask, did you know that you wanted to be in tech as you were transitioning out of the military?
No. So I a little bit different, after 20 years, I really didn't know who I was or what I wanted. And I think a lot of folks, separating from the military can be its own, traumatic experience. So I was really kind of lost in the sauce. And without, one thing about your time in the military is you can read almost every job description and kind of go, yeah, I can do that. If I can't do it, I can figure out how to do it, right? Well, but you can't really interview that way. You've got to be able to have those, stories and translate your experience. And a lot of times what you're doing is you're filtering it down to just like the easiest, smallest digestible bite. So I was kind of like, yeah, I can do anything or I can do nothing. I linked up with a good friend of mine who had transitioned recently, and he recommended a slew of programs, one of them being a program called Breakline Education, along with programs like 4Block, Higher Military, all of the different things that offer SkillBridge. But for me, Breakline was really seminal. It was really focused on transitioning veterans into tech. And I think it was after visiting, Silicon Valley and being in those spaces that I was like, wow, this is actually the cultural shift that I need. And this is like the cultural environment that I would really enjoy working in. And so then you begin reverse engineering kind of your experience to make sure you can tell that story, through the interview process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for that. I'm just curious about Tamia and Katherine. Did you guys always know that you were going to work in tech as you were transitioning out, or kind of working your way through different jobs as you guys have? Whoever feels the free to go first. I'd hate to keep calling on people. I want to make it more of a discussion.
Go ahead, Tamia. Go ahead.
Yes, I'm going to say yes, I did. When I separated overseas, so I knew the easiest way for me to stay overseas was to try to find a government job overseas. So, and with the only experience I had was computers, I was hammering away at USA jobs. So yes, I definitely knew that IT was what I had to do if I wanted to stay in Europe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So during that transition, how was your experience with USA jobs and navigating that system?
I imagine that lots of people experience the same thing that I experienced. So it's 100 applications, hoping that one of those applications lands. And I'm going to be honest, And it's the same now. It's not like it's changed since I've gone up the ladder. It's like the magic number. Once you've applied like 100 different positions, whether you know that you'll fit that position or not, doesn't matter. Just get to 100 and then you'll start to see offers coming in. It's the oddest thing ever. But that's how it happened. And actually my first federal job, I didn't have an interview. I just received an email that said, hey, congratulations, you got selected. I was like, yay, happy days.
Wow. That's solid advice. Apply for 100 jobs and something will start to come in. That was my experience with USA Jobs as well. Just applying. I think I only hit 75 before I gave up. So kudos to you for going all the way.
I tell people that all the time. I'm like 100. My magic number has always been 100. And someone else is like, yeah, you know what? I think I've put in like 100 apps. And then I started to get offers. And the first offer that you take, because you're like, I've applied 100. I'm taking this first offer. And as soon as you say yes, then like another one will come in. You're like, but I already said yes. So, but yeah, 100.
I love it. What about you, Katherine? Has that been your experience? I see your head nodding. I think we're all relating.
Yeah, I didn't go through USA Jobs, but it's definitely sort of the tenacity of knowing that you just have to keep applying until you get a response. I didn't know that I wanted to go in tech. I also didn't really know what I wanted to do when I left the military. All I knew is that I didn't actually want to do engineering anymore because I got kind of mad at it. And so I was going to go to grad school. I was going to study neuroscience, and it was going to be something completely different. And the fact that I ended actually up back in tech is quite interesting. But I came at it from a very different perspective because I was able to do policy and ethics with my engineering dissertation. And because I did the policy side, I discovered that I wanted to start impacting change in product life cycles. And because we can't enact federal consumer privacy legislation in the United States, the best way to do that is to actually, go to the company and actually start working with the people who are building the technology. And so that's how I ended up at the company that I'm at, is because I can actually work with engineers on equitable and ethical tech. And so that was a great opportunity for me. And if you had told me this when I was leaving the military, even when I was starting my PhD, I would be like, no, I'm going to go, work for like an NGO or, be a professor in a lab somewhere. This was definitely not on my radar until about 6 months before I graduated, when I actually, first had an informational interview for the job. So you never know what the world is going to throw you.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, well, the common theme between the stories is kind of applying, taking advantage of resources, working your way through it, and quite literally bootstrapping the process of finding a job and trying to navigate through that process. What I'm curious about next is what is the expectation versus the reality of the interview process, and how that interview process was. I think a lot of people are not aware of how intense the interview process can be at some of these companies. And I'm wondering if any of you have ever experienced that process with the intensity that you went through. We can start with Vivian.
For sure. So I kind of wanted to button up what Katherine had said and just say, in the tech space, specifically big tech, the referral process is very, very, very important. So I tell everyone, get on LinkedIn. You will find that there are a ton of veterans across different tech companies. Like Katherine mentioned, an informational interview. If you see someone and you're like, what is that job like? Reach out on LinkedIn and just have an informational interview, a zero pressure, zero expectation informational interview, because over time, it'll help you understand what the job descriptions actually mean. And there's a vernacular and a language in that may be a barrier to entry for some veterans as well. So there are veterans in these organizations that are more than willing to help you. So I actually, one of my buddies put in a referral for me. I remember getting hit up by the recruiter, and I had successfully gone through the interview process with the defense contractor, but that was really based on, did I meet the requirements that the government had put in place for them to, hire me into that position. Interviewing for a private company is very different, right? So it was rounds and rounds and rounds of interviews. and at every point I had to be willing to say, yes, this could be the fifth round of the interview process, and I could still get a no, right? And I'm okay with that, and I'm gonna keep bringing my best self to these to the interviews, and that's where really being able to distill down your military experience into digestible bites that are also in civilian speak, so you're not, you know, losing folks in a sea of acronyms. But, you know, I also say, you know, throw in some of your cool human stuff, right? Like, it still makes you interesting. You don't need to, you know, pack up all of your military experience and put it in a cedar chest, never to talk about it again. But yeah, you don't want to talk about anything that takes you like out of the present mind of the interview. So if talking about combat or deployment or something like that makes you kind of drift away, steer clear of those, you know, those kind of stories, right? And what I have found, and this is kind of my cheat code, my hack, is that 9 times out of 10, what you do in training and in garrison is still just as relevant and vital throughout the interview process than in a combat deployment or, you know, something where you receive like a valorous medal or something like that. So
I love that. And just one more question. How did Breakline prepare you for that?
So Breakline was an absolute godsend. You know, I do want to shout out Breakline. It is an organization founded by a woman named Bethany Coates, and their initial vertical, if you will, was getting veterans into Splunk. That's expanded to persons of color, and hopefully is just going to continue to expand into different underrepresented groups. So interview prep is a huge thing, right? And having that repetition of it, getting your elevator pitch down, understanding the negotiation process when it comes to an offer, and really getting into the mindset that you're not really interviewing for a job, you're interviewing for an offer. And the more offers you get, the more competitive you are in the negotiation space. And so it just takes practice to refine, you know, to distill 20 years of military experience into, tell me about a time you managed people, right? It was like, I mean, you know, I could have talked for hours on it, but I had to be able to, you know, be precise and hit the answer and still leave time for, you know, discussion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's a wonderful program. Bethany Coates is a dear friend of mine, and I love the work that she's doing. So I'm glad to hear that that's working out for you. Katherine, how was your interview process? I mean, I'm going from a PhD, and you never in a million years thought you'd be working back in tech, and here you are. So it's probably a surreal experience for you. How many interviews did you go through at Microsoft before you got an offer?
Yeah, so I ended up doing one round of interviews with my current team. And it was strange because I'd already done informationals with 3 of the people I interviewed with. And so it to me it felt much more like a conversation. And because of the nature of the team that I'm on, um, there weren't a lot of like you know, code questions or like whiteboard questions, and that was the thing that I was going to be I guess most wary of, because by the time I had, you know, gone through the military and gone through my PhD, the extent of my coding knowledge was MATLAB. And if they were going to make me try to write something in C or something like that, it was going to be a really long day for everyone. And so what a lot of it was just talking through like situations of like working with product teams, or what happens if you encountered this with a product team, or how would you approach this particular type of situations. And what was helpful for me was to be able to answer the questions both up front, but then being able to give an example. And so if it was an example where I was able to draw on my congressional experience, or being able to go back to military experience and being able to succinctly describe why that experience was relevant to the question that they had just asked me as a backup for the answer that I was giving them. Because as someone coming in to a position where I maybe didn't have the quote unquote experience they were looking for in a traditional sense, but I did have this, slew of military experience, and I did have the experience for my PhD, and to demonstrate that I didn't have the traditional experience they were looking for, but I did have experiences that were going to be relevant to the job. I thought was very important. So to be able to sprinkle that in, and not make it sound like it was a military story time, but like this is relevant to the conversation, was fairly important. And then, yeah, it was actually not as painful as I thought it would be. But then again, interviews are always pretty painful. So you always, leave thinking that you could have done more. But I'm coming up on 2 years on the team that I'm on. So I obviously did something right.
Yeah. Awesome. And how did you find out about this job, Katherine?
Crazy story. I found out about it on Twitter because I followed someone who gave a talk at UW a couple years before, and they randomly posted that they had moved from one tech company to Microsoft and that the team was building out, and if people were interested, send in a resume. So I sent in a resume because I was like, hey, I'm coming up on defending my dissertation. I probably need a job. And that was sort of the click for me of where am I actually going to start making the most difference. And this was while I was in DC working in Congress. And so, I did also apply to NGOs and had thought about, what happens if I stay in DC. And so it was, looking at the options that were available. And that was the moment I was like, oh, there just happens to be this very large tech company, a couple miles away up the road. Maybe I should consider working for them. And they did happen to have that opportunity. So, yes, you never know what happens on social media. So I was incredibly lucky that happened.
That's awesome. The stars aligned for sure for you. Awesome.
Yep.
Yeah. How was your interview process after applying for 100 jobs?
Actually, this job that I currently am holding, the interview process was pretty intense because of where I work. But I had a first round and then a second round. And actually, we were going to the movies. We were in Germany, and it's a bunch of friends. I think we were going to go see Marvel or Star Wars. And it's thunderstorming outside. And I'm actually in the car having my last interview for my current job. Well, it's thundering outside. It's pouring down rain. And Ashley and all of our friends are in the movie theater. I missed the first 15 minutes because I was in this interview. And I was like, I get inside the movies and they're like, how did it go? But they're whispering, they're like, wait, don't talk because we're trying to watch this movie. So everyone was like, so how did it go eventually? And I was like, honestly, I don't think I'm going to get it because I felt it was pretty bad. It was pretty bad, the thunder, everything. And it actually turned out, normally when I have a bad feeling about an interview, I usually get the offer, which is really weird. It's just that reverse thing. But I think it was like 3 rounds, and it was like different people each round. So it was pretty intense, pretty intense.
And how did you find out about this particular job that you're in right now?
USA job. So it was my time to come back to the States. So I didn't want the Army to select a job for me. So I was like, I need to be hammering USA jobs 24/7. And I actually never heard of Office of Management and Budget before. I was just like, you know what? It's this level. It's this grade. Let me just apply. And here I am almost 2 years later.
Awesome. So I hear Vivian went through Breakline and she listed off a lot of organizations that do a lot of this transition work, social media and USA jobs. For anybody that's listening, those are pretty common areas, and referrals. I was surprised no one said that, but I think Vivian mentioned a friend had told her about the job. So referrals are also like a big place to find jobs. And I'm just curious for Tamia and Katherine, did you leverage any of the veteran service organizations throughout your process as well? As like Vivian mentioned, Breakline, did you leverage any services at that time?
I did not personally. I thought about doing the vets to teachers or something like that. I thought about doing that, but no, I really didn't use, honestly, it's Ashley and me just plugging away at what do I think is going to help me get to the next step, to be honest.
That's why you're here, because it's called bootstrapping, and that's exactly what you did. I love
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
What about you, Catherine? Anything that you leveraged for anybody that's listening?
Uh, I was involved with SVA, and so there was a lot of the networking there. I think, just going to the career fair there and walking around. I think the last SVA conference that I went to, that I think was the last one that was in person, um, in 2019. No, they had one in 2020 because they're in January. Sorry, dates. Time is relative. But that was the first time that I was actually going around and actually talking to people and finding out what jobs were open. I was also tangentially sort of affiliated with the Operation Code community for a while, since it was started down in Oregon. I'm from Oregon, and I know some of the folks who founded it. So that was interesting to sort of get to know them and get to know their journey. But I never never needed to take part of their resources. But I do know them, so that was cool, and it's interesting to see all the cool things that they do. And I still follow them on Twitter. You'll sense a theme here with Twitter. But yeah, seeing all the things that they're doing. So yeah.
That's awesome. I mean, everybody seems really connected and plugged in to what's going on, whether it's Twitter, USA Jobs, other organizations, friends of friends. They definitely have to kind of be looking for a job as a full-time job. Looking for a job in tech is even more than a full-time job. It's a very weird, and I'll say Silicon Valley because that's where a lot of them are, but we know that we have Microsoft and we're located in different areas, but it's a weird little club of like, once you're in tech, you're in, but getting your foot in is really difficult. So that's why I asked about referrals and other things, because I want to labor on that point. So someone mentioned information interviews, and before we go any further, I'd love for everybody just to take maybe just 1 or 2 minutes just to kind of give the listener a little bit more detail about what you do, because we're probably at the point where people are like, I don't know if this is for me, and they click off. And I don't want people to click off. I want people to find out a little bit more about what you do. You say program manager at Microsoft. Some people may say, I have no idea what that is. So just digging in a little deeper into the title, just to give people insight into what you do and what you do in tech, because if that interests them, they may connect with you on LinkedIn or Twitter and ask some questions and may want to reach out for an informational interview. So I'll start with this side, and I'll start with Tamia. I'd love to hear just a little bit more about what you do, and just take a minute just to give some high level details in like layman terms for us who don't understand what you do.
So
No pressure. No pressure.
What I do. So I work in the office that basically puts out the policies for the federal government when it comes to IT and their information systems. We work with the agencies. We help create policies for, whatever IT related to protect data, assets, all of the things, the network, everything, which has been interesting. It's the game of people like security, but they don't like some of the restrictions of security. So it's always trying to find that balance when we're doing policy, when we're working with the agencies, to really help them to secure their network, their data, their whatever. It's just, that fine line of balance of people hate security because they feel like we're always going to say no in general, because, there's a red flag, but there's always a way to try to find a way to say yes. And that's definitely what our office does, is try to help them find yes without, putting a lot of things in jeopardy in the process.
Love that. Thank you so much for that. I appreciate that. Catherine?
I definitely feel you when you say, everyone likes it, but they don't like the work that goes into it. So I'm a program manager on a team called Ethics and Society. And we work with product teams to help them make their products more equitable, ethical, and sustainable. And so that means they can come to us with a product, and we have a suite of tools and practices that we then use to analyze it. And we use practices like value-sensitive design and stakeholder analysis to look at who will be impacted by the technology. Are there people who will be disproportionately impacted? etc. And then what are ways that you can mitigate those impacts, or are there ways that you can address them before the technology gets released? And so it's great because a lot of this means that we're addressing issues before a product gets released onto the market. But it also means that you get to have a lot of really interesting conversations with product teams about, what do they want the product to be used for, who is their intended audience, and really getting into a lot of these meaty questions during the product cycle versus 6 months after it's released and you're like, oh no, we didn't realize this thing, how are we going to try to mitigate this afterwards? And so I work with product teams. I do a lot of also internal work, both for the team and for sort of tooling, I guess, and Microsoft at large about how do we actually get everyone to use these tools. And so it's just a lot of coordinating, a lot of meetings, a lot of schedules, a lot of, hey, we need to do this, we need to reprioritize this. So if you're really good at like building relationships and coordination, it's a really good job for you because you spend a lot of time managing expectation and making sure that everyone's on the same page. Because if they're not, it tends to not go well. But it's a great way to you spend a lot of time learning about a lot of different fields and you get to know a lot of different people. And so it's very similar to when I was on the F-35 because you had to work with, the other military services, you had to work with the contractors, you had to work with the government civilians, you had to work with the maintainers, you had to work with the pilots, you had to work with all those people. And it's the same in my current job of all the different product teams, and you have to work with designers and researchers and the other programmers. And so you have to be able to take everyone else's different perspectives into consideration as you're making all these plans. So you get to be this gigantic puppet master. It's actually kind of cool.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for that. That sounds fun. That sounds like a lot of fun. Vivian, I'd love to hear more about what you do.
So I am a solutions engineer, which in Splunk falls under our pre-sales category, or it's part of sales. So imagine the folks that go out and do demos and different product briefings, anything that's customer facing before a customer would actually purchase the product or decide to use the product. And so I spent a lot of time learning Splunk as a product and our various products. Shout out to veterans. Splunk Fundamentals 1 and 2 are actually free for veterans. So you can Google that and find that. But I spent a lot of time immersed in Splunk, but then I also am constantly thinking of different use cases. And I think for me, because I work in the public sector space, I still have a lot of relationships with people that are in those spaces. So it was very important for me that I walked in with a product that I believe was actually the right solution. And I mean, for some folks, it's not that important. For me, it was, right? Like I spent 20 years in these spaces. I can really empathize with these analysts. And I definitely wanted to be able to walk in and say, hey, I think I can help make your life a little bit better. And so, one thing I will say about the interview process is that's where you're also interviewing the company. It's also a good chance for you to see if it's a cultural fit with, the life that you imagine you can provide to yourself and to your family post-career. And so, I fell in love with the Splunk product, and that makes my job even more easier and exciting, right? And so I do a lot of solutioning with our different partners, different tech companies, just trying to find the right answer for different use cases.
Yeah, you bring up a good point about interviewing them, finding a culture fit, which brings me to my next question for you, Vivian, which is, how did you stay true to your values during that interview process? What advice would you give someone that was kind of maybe concerned about that culture fit, or just your experience with making sure that you stay true to your values personally?
So the military, we don't do interviews, right? We do boards, which tend to be like one-way conversations where someone is just evaluating every aspect of you to see if you're like suited for a promotion or for this post or whatever. And I would say through Breakline and through really kind of the philosophy I wanted to have in this chapter of my life, I really wanted to bring myself to work. So it was like, I'm not going to sit here and be super rigid and be like, it was like, I smile a lot, I laugh a lot. I'm probably going to tell like a funny joke. You're probably going to hear something about, my crazy mom, rest in peace, from Brooklyn, right? So in this interview process, I just felt like I wanted to be hired for me. And so I had to have the courage enough as well to be myself, right? And it was kind of like, well, if they don't really like me, I'm gonna be me. I'm gonna be prepared. I'm gonna be professional. I know I'm qualified. But if they don't like jive with me, then we both go our separate ways. And I was really okay with that, because it was really much more important for me to be in a healthy workplace culture that I could thrive in, than just taking a job offer, right?
Right. Right. Yeah. I love that you bring up courage. That's something that I work with in my own business. And it's something that it's so hard to dig deep for that courage sometimes to be ourselves. We all have experienced that as we've grown personally and professionally. And I think you nailed it. Like, it does take courage to show up with the side shaved head and a nose ring and say, I'm moderating this panel. This is me. I'm Justine. Hey, because there's a lot of judgments and stereotypes that come along with those things, but still having the courage to show up and say, I'm qualified. This is what I do. This is what I love to do. So thank you for that. Tamia, Katherine, can you relate to that at all? Did you have anything to add to that? Because I think that was perfect. And I think it's really scary when you're trying to dig deep for that courage. And if you have maybe a story or an experience, please jump in there.
I definitely think that, as Vivian said, that you are interviewing the company. And I definitely think that people shouldn't be scared to ask them questions and ask them the hard questions. I mean, you're at work 8, 9, maybe 10 hours. So you're there a good part of your day. So at least look into whether or not this is really something, an organization, a company that you really want to be a part of, and ask them the tough questions. In my current job, there was lots of press about the current office that I'm in. And I asked them during my interview, I said, so I saw in federal news that these were the issues that your office was having. Where are you at now with handling these issues? And I'm sure it took them offhand because, I spoke to my supervisor at the time. I was like, is it okay for me to ask them these questions? He's like, absolutely. Do you want to work there? Do you want to see what they're changing about their culture, about what you've read in the press? He's like, absolutely, ask them. So don't be afraid to ask them the hard questions. If you've researched and you see things in the news or media, question them about it, because you want to know, have they've taken the steps to try to change the culture or whatever the issues were. So I definitely think that that's important too.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much. All right. Well, next we're going to kind of talk a little bit about barriers to entry, and any barriers that you've experienced internally. I don't want to put anybody on blast, but barriers are real. I said in the beginning that we're going to talk about the expectation and the reality. I'm wondering if we can kind of dig into a little bit of the realities as minority veterans, some of the realities, maybe some of the barriers that we face. And specifically in tech, because that's what we're talking about, or in the process of bootstrapping, maybe some of those barriers that you faced in the process of getting where you are today. As 4 women on this call, I know that we could talk about this all day long, right? And there's like a part of me that wants to ask a specific question, but then there's a part of me that wants everybody to share what's on their heart, because everybody has different experiences, and we're not willing to share all of it at this time. But if there's something specific for the listener today that you wanted to share, I'd love for you to open up and share maybe some of those barriers. Vivian, in particular, Silicon Valley, in the press all the time. Yeah, all the time. It's amazing to hear you talk about Splunk and to debunk some of that. But I've lived in Silicon Valley. Some of the stuff is true. Some of it is true. I'll just say I lived there for 3 years, and and some of it really is true. And I faced a lot of challenges out there when I was there as the only woman of color, and in some cases the only woman in most rooms. And so I'm wondering if you can relate to that and any challenges you face, and share what however you feel is comfortable for you.
Yeah, so I'll be really candid. when I left the military, being a veteran is an underrepresented group category. Or I was like a recruiter's dream come true, I guess. I like check so many of the boxes, and I'm left-handed, right? Like, so if they got paid extra for that, like, I threw that in there as well. But what was also significant was that this was the first time that I checked disabled, right? That I was bringing the fact that I was not picture perfect, right? So this was the first time as a person of color, as a woman of color in this space, I felt courageous enough to say, I may need additional resources, support, or services because there is something wrong or something unique about me. I am neurodivergent, right? I do have chronic PTSD or whatever. And I say that because I think when you're a woman, when you're a woman of color, we always try to be perfect on paper. Like, you try to be perfect, right? Because it's not that you're trying to get the job, you're trying to give them zero reason not to give you the job. And you're trying to override all of these institutional biases. And so for me, checking the box of being disabled was the first time I allowed myself to be imperfect, what I thought was imperfect on paper. And so, that was a huge step for me. You will face microaggressions in everywhere you work. If those microaggressions are consistent with the corporate culture, you will know it and you should leave. Do not stay anywhere that does not serve you, period. Life is too short. And so for me, it is, yes, I'm going to face microaggressions. Yes, now in this chapter of my life, I'm going to correct those microaggressions because we should all work in anti-racist, anti-misogynist, anti-discriminatory workplaces. Not free of these things, but anti these things, right? And so if correcting a microaggression made me feel like all of a sudden I'd have a target on my back, then I would leave, I would either quit or I'm gonna cause some hell, raise some hell before on my way out, right? Like, and it's important to advocate for other people in that space. So, when it comes to that courage, it's also that, like, I was just like, man, I'm not gonna have survived everything I survived in the military and go work for a private company and not be heard and not be seen and not be valued. And if they don't value, and that's one of the beauties of getting into tech, is just like you said, Justine, once you're in, you're kind of in. And so all of a sudden, I felt a lot more confident in my market value as soon as I accepted that offer, because, I stay getting, contacted. But, the most important thing is to be in a healthy workplace that serves you. And if there's any inconsistency there between, there's going to be the human layer where we don't get things exactly right, but you're going to know if that's the corporate culture. And if that doesn't work for you, leave. You're worth too much.
I love that. Yes, and that brings back full circle to what Tamia said about the asking questions. I mean, I don't know how you don't have to ask these direct questions, but you can ask enough questions and have a conversation to really get to know them as people and learn more about their culture. And I think on our gut is a really good base, and our hearts is a really good, if something feels off, it's probably off, so we're all pretty good. Our guts are always the best. Did anybody have anything that they wanted to add to that? Because I was like, yes to all of that, but I'm just curious if anybody has experienced any barriers, challenges, or has had to maybe leave a job because while they're in the process of bootstrapping and in the process of getting to jobs. Have you ever had to leave a job due to some barriers?
Yes. One of my civilian jobs, honestly, I only stayed 6 months. That's all I could handle was 6 months. There's, as Vivian said, as being a woman of color, there was a tendency that I wasn't heard, or it was the mispronouncing of my name or giving me some other name is nowhere close to my name in situations that I would become so frustrated. And I would sit there and I think, okay, you know what? I don't have to deal with this. I really don't. There's definitely the barriers. There's definitely, being women. My previous jobs, I was usually the only woman on a team full of men. So, in our huddles, I would say something and it's like, I'm there, but I'm not there. And I said, you know what? I have certs. I have the education, probably, but more than some of them on my team. I had higher education than them, more certs than them, and I still wasn't heard. So it gets to the point where either I became very distant and quiet, or I was hammering USA Jobs to find the job. But now I speak up for myself. You're not going to mispronounce my name. You're not going to add letters to my name that don't exist. You're just not going to. And I don't know, I think all of us get to that point, or we get to a level where we're just like, okay, we're not going to accept it. So the barriers are definitely there. You just have to figure out how to navigate it. And definitely what Vivian said, if it's not doing something for you, it's time to move on. And I think for all of my positions, it all has reached a point where either I wasn't happy for whatever reason. And most times when people leave a job, it's because of the people. And usually your supervisors, the direct people. And, sometimes it can be overwhelming, especially, working for the government, say, because after 3 years, everyone uses that term for E7s. It takes like an act of God to get you fired, So, I mean, after 3 years, you are, you've passed that hurdle of probation working for the government. So it does make things a little bit difficult, but certainly you can stand up for yourself, and certainly, you can move on to something else, because what one won't do, somebody else will do.
Yes. Thank you for that. I just find all three of you so courageous, because my personal journey has taken me into entrepreneurship to kind of combat all of this. And I just think you guys are completely courageous for sticking it out and continuing to hammer away and find your journey to where you are today, because I gave up. I did. I gave up and I just started building things on my own. But the barriers don't go away. The truth is that I still have to raise money. I still have to find clients. I still have to do everything. But I was so naive. I just left mad and angry, thinking, I'm going to do my own thing. And I had to learn all the same lessons. So they don't go away. But I love what you said to me about, finding the courage to, if this doesn't serve you, finding the courage. It's like dating. That's what I hear, really. It's
Yes.
like dating.
Yes.
It's like, this isn't working for me. It's not you, it's me. But in this situation, it's you. And it's not me.
For sure.
This is
Sure.
awesome. Katherine, did you have anything that you wanted to add?
The only thing I'll add is it's been very interesting for me in that both in grad school and the job that I'm in, I've been the only veteran in the space, which for all the stereotypes about veterans and for the backstory of founding MVA, when I left the military, I very specifically was like, I'm not a veteran. I'm just someone who served in the military. And I looked up the definition, like the federal definition of veteran, to see if I could check it on my grad school applications. And then to show up in these spaces and to be like the token veteran, or like the person who you ask the military questions of, just seems very strange. And so to get in these situations with microaggressions, or situations where escalations are happening or something like that, it's almost the like, I have a very specific kind of training, and that kind of training is escalations of chain of command, and like, what am I going to do, and like, how do I utilize the resources that I have in these situations to demonstrate the fact that I am competent, and demonstrate that I can get a handle of a particular situation. And it's not that the situation's out of control, it's that I need a particular set of resources and maybe I don't have them. And so it's very interesting when I get into particular situations and I find myself doing something and I'm like, oh, I know exactly where that's coming from. That's that like weird, like, going back to like being a cadet in ROTC, and like the lead lab training, or like ConOps planning or something like that neuron's firing. And I'm like, I know exactly what I'm doing. And it's just like that little like part of my brain in the back of my head is like, this is what you're doing right now, and that's going to kick in. And that has saved me from many situations. But at the same time, it's almost that grounding of, I either can rely on this very particular set of training that served me very well for a very long time, or I could do something very rash and scream 4-letter words at people, and I will rely on my training instead and save the 4-letter words for, when I'm, having an adult beverage with friends and want to rant about my day, which has served me well as well.
That was going to be my next question, is support. So how do you build
Oh, yes.
community?
Oh, yes.
Friends are a huge part of that. And I think that's where
Yep.
VA really comes in, and the support and the community and the things that we do here within the organization. A lot of the tech companies have organizations within the organization. They have a lot of allies and different groups. Are there veteran organizations or groups within the locations, within the organizations that you work at? Catherine,
Mhm.
is there a veteran organization at Microsoft? Could
Yep.
you tell us a little bit about that and how
Yep.
that operates, and maybe how you
Yeah.
kind of navigate that space?
Mhm. So there's ERGs, employee resource groups at the Microsoft level, and there's military at Microsoft, which sort of serves the whole company. And so they do company-wide events. They did them last month for military, the month of military family, and then they'll usually do Veterans Day events and bring in speakers and things like that. And then each sort of org can also have its own or own, like, at Microsoft org as well. And so I'm actually co-lead of the DTP at Millet DTP, which is this particular org that I'm in. And so that allows each particular org to have military-centric events. And so we have speakers, lunches, things like that. And it's just another way to find community. And so it's great that you're able to reach out and find other people. Very active Teams channels, and it's great there because there's specific help channels of, like, hey, I have a particular person, they want to apply for this type of job. Is there someone who can chat with them about it from this location? Someone like, yeah, I can chat with them. Or like, hey, does anyone know if there's any jobs opening up in this particular area? Because I have someone who's, terminal leave, or, their family's coming in. And so it's a great place for people to connect. And, everyone who comes in usually is like, hey, new person here. Everyone shares out Army Navy game. Usually there's a lot of trash talk going on in the channel as well. As Air Force, I'm like, meh. But it's a great place for the community, for people to connect. 'Cause I think a lot of times as well, particularly around some of the major holidays, there's just certain things that, veterans in particular, like, hey, we understand what it's like. We know what you're going through right now. Reach out if you need someone. We're here. And I think that's also particularly important for a lot of people. So yeah, 12 out of 10 recommend ERGs and getting involved with them. And you can be involved as little as much as you want. And they usually have free food. So, double bonus.
That's a win. That's a win. Vivian, does Splunk have something similar?
Oh yeah, I mean, part of the thing I love about Splunk is all the variety of ERGs, because it is trying to make sure people do feel seen and do have a safe space where they can go and share their particular needs, their particular stories, and really highlight the fact that, we are a beautiful, coalition of folks that come together to solve really difficult problems, and so I really enjoy the veterans ERG, but I also enjoy, like, our, veteran, our ERG for persons of color, our neurodiversity ERG. I'm telling y'all name it. I'm in the Pride ERG right now. We watched Tu Wong Fu on, like, a live stream. I mean, I just really, really enjoy it. And I think I participate a lot in various ERGs also just as an ally, right? Like, so I don't necessarily go just to the ones that serve me and my communities or how I identify. I also go to be an ally for others. And that's really important to me.
Yeah, I actually hosted an event at Splunk when I was at Bunker Labs. So I can speak personally to them. I never hosted anything at Microsoft just because of my location, but I know that they're really active as well. And they do a lot of things for the veteran community outside the organization as well. And for military spouses, there's a lot. Tamia, is there anything like this where you work as well, or are there other veterans?
We have the resource groups, but there's nothing specific for veterans. In my current office, I think there's 3 or 4 of us. So we're able to share stories, or we understand where each other is coming from, because there's only 3 or 4 of us. Because I'm Army and one of my colleagues is Navy, you know, when it's football season, it's a thing. But I mean, it's good to know that I'm around other veterans, that when something's happening and I'm frustrated, like, yep, this would not happen in the military. You know, we're on that same page.
Yeah.
But, you know, I use other avenues, you know, Reddit, Twitter. Twitter is like my favorite thing in the world, to really connect with people in IT outside of the government. So, I mean, there's a lot of ways that I'm still connecting with people, veterans alike, just so that I have that camaraderie.
I love that. Well, we're almost out of time, and it went by so quickly. It always does. And I could sit here and talk to you guys all night long, but we don't want to do that because we have things to do. So for the sake of time, I just wanted to go around the room, the virtual room, and see if anybody had any parting words for anybody that's listening to this or watching the replay and they're thinking about getting into tech, or maybe in the process of applying for those 100 jobs, or is in the process of working their way up to get their foot in the door. What advice would you leave with them? And I'll start with Katherine.
Ooh, okay. This is very specific advice for the state of Washington. There's a program called Apprenti, and it's run, and of course I'm gonna mess this up because it's being recorded, but it's like a technical apprenticeship program, where you can come in and kind of like retraining boot camp style, but they place you with tech companies, and then kind of like how you would have like an apprenticeship program, if you were doing like a trade training or something like that. It allows you to get the technical training on the job, and then you can get hired into it. And so that's a great way if you're looking for either retraining into a technical field, or you want to try to do something different and you're already technical and need a different set of technical expertise. There are, I think they actually have other locations now, but you can look to see if there's equivalent like technical apprenticeship programs in your area. Those tend to be really good if that's something that you're interested in doing. So look for those because they're cool.
That's awesome. That's solid advice. Really good advice. Vivian, what advice would you leave the listener with?
So definitely I would say, you know, informational interviews if you think it's something you're interested in. And that's just saying, hey, Vivian, I see you're on LinkedIn. You work at Splunk. Can I get 30 minutes and you just tell me what your job is? Don't certificate yourself, right? Or certify yourself. Use there are a lot of different free trainings and free opportunities out there. Please make sure you're leveraging your resources as best as possible before paying $1,000 or something like that for a certificate. And it's those informational interviews that'll really let you know what's actually necessary for, you know, to be competitive in the space. And don't be afraid of hearing that no, because it only takes one yes. Right. So the same, you know, courage you have every single day, being you, showing up for your family, for yourself, for the world. You showed up for your country in uniform. You can show up and have someone say, no, we're going to go with another candidate. You'll be fine. Just keep pressing through, keep it out in the universe, and it'll come back to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And Tamia, parting words.
Twitter. There are things.
Come full circle.
Everything I do is on Twitter. So there's Mentor Mondays, which is a tagline on Mondays that if anyone's looking for a mentor or wants to be a mentor, or looking for a mentor or wants to be a mentor, whether you're trying to get into IT and cyber, whether you have been in it for a while, every Monday it's posted on Twitter. There's also Tuesdays if people are looking for jobs, whether you're just trying to get into tech or you've been in tech, on Tuesdays, there's a hashtag for you to follow that if you have a job opening, just post it and people can ask you questions, all kinds of things. There's always organizations like I'm part of Blacks in Tech that offer free training through all of their sponsors that they use. Cyber Jiu-Jitsu, like really Google or just ask people, what are the free resources that you can utilize to help better yourself, whether you've been in tech for a while, you're new to it, you want to get into it, whatever the case may be, there is something for everybody, whether a person of color, whether you're a woman, there are free resources and, they're there for people to use. And, I don't know that if a lot of people know that they're there, but if you use information security or cybersecurity on Twitter, you'll start to see these hashtags. Mondays and Tuesdays are definitely the days for people, experienced and inexperienced.
That's awesome. With that, we have a great way of closing. I really appreciate your time this evening, and to everybody that's been watching and anybody that watches the replay, hopefully you stuck with us. And with that, that is the end of our panel. Thank you so much for being with us this evening. And I hope to connect with all of you on Twitter and LinkedIn. I need to step my Twitter game up. That's what I learned tonight.
Definitely.
I need to step it up. There's a lot happening that I'm missing out on. So I'll definitely be reaching out, and I hope to stay in touch with you guys. And good luck to you all, and keep doing what you're doing. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. And it was great.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Yep.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.